started here. Greg Springer is our presenter today from Kenai Fishing Company, and he's got lots of hand gestures, so he'll be wearing a headset.
All right, check. Everybody hear me back there?
Yep.
Awesome. I was required by the boss to use the microphone. Normally my voice doesn't have a problem carrying very far, but I feel like I'm yelling at you. Holler and I'll quiet down a little bit. Like she said, my name is Greg Springer. I've been guiding fishing since 2004 in Washington and Alaska. So I met my wife Samantha up here a few summers back, and now we've since migrated here and live here full time in sunny Soldotna. Kenai River's super special to me. I'm blessed to be able to do the job that I do in guide fishing, and we thought it would be a great idea to put together a little Sockeye seminar to kind of help teach you guys and show you guys some things maybe that you don't know about it. As a guide on the river, a couple hundred days a year, we see a lot of different things, and one thing that I really see a lot is a lot of anglers that are not guided that kind of seem lost, that maybe need some advice or could use just a few pointers that would help them harvest more fish, be more successful, and in the end of the day, just have more fun. And in reality, that's why we go fishing, right? We want to have fun. We want to make memories. We want to take grandma and grandpa. We want to take the kids, take our friends. And we got such a limited season here in Alaska to get outside and play. And with jobs and life, we don't always get to go a lot. So we want to capitalize on those times we're out there, and fishing's fun, but catching's a whole lot more fun. So today, kind of just an overview of what we're going to do. There's a cool picture of my son when he was 5 years old, catching his first king salmon. So pretty special deal. Not these days we're closed for kings as they're trying to work on rehabilitating those guys, but that was one we got to sneak in before closure. So a few things we're going to talk about today, just some basic sockeye info, kind of learn a little bit about the fish real briefly. What is flossing? A lot of people don't even really understand. They just kind of grab a hook and a lead and flip it out there and look at the guy next to them and hope for the best. And at the end of this, I think you'll have a real good idea of what we're trying to do. I'll show you some setups, ideal tackle setups, and discuss kind of every end of that so you have a better idea of how to set up your rod to do that. Some technique as well, and that's really important when you get out to the river. There's just a few things you need to do right to really increase your odds of hooking more fish. And then we'll also talk about when and where to go, because we know it's a long run of fish, pretty much starting here in early June. Sockeye start swimming up our rivers, and they're here till the middle part of August, and we need to know where do we go. There's a lot of gravel out there, a lot of real estate. When should I go and where should I go, and how do I time these fish as they swim up the river? And super important is, and we've all been there, I tend to lose quite a few myself these days, but once I hook one, what do I do, right? How do I land it? How do I get past just the joy of hooking one to scooping that thing up and bringing it home to eat? We'll briefly touch on some sockeye ethics, just some stuff regarding catch and release and some bank etiquette and how to integrate into crowded areas. I know it can be, even for myself after doing it a long time, very intimidating to break into a group when you see a gravel bar with 40 people on it. You know, there's a reason they're there. It's a good spot to fish, and there's certain key spots where the sockeye really come by in high numbers in an advantageous position to catch them. And with that, you'll see a large group of people. And you can certainly probably go find solitude, but there's a reason there's no one there. So we'll give you some advice and ways to integrate into those areas and how to approach those areas and not feel silly when you're doing it, and make some friends along the way. And what you find over time is when you make friends out there, it's really nice to know people. When you see the guy in the blue boat or the guy with the red hat or the gal, whatever, you know each other. You can smile and wave and, hey, we're coming in. And just, we talked about that, some bank fishing etiquette, and then a few of the major common mistakes and things we want to avoid, as well as some safety stuff that'll keep you safe out there. If you play long enough with a bunch of lead, a bunch of hooks, and water, eventually bad things can happen. And as guides, we see it pretty frequently where something less than desirable happens. And honestly, if you use a few of the tips I give you, you can really avoid having those catastrophic failures. We don't need to go to the emergency room, and we don't need people floating downriver. And then I'll share with you one of my favorite sockeye salmon brines. It's super simple. Learned it from a native gal way back in Togiak, and that's kind of my go-to for salmon. Just an idea of something to do with your fish when you're done with it. It's one of the questions we get from the tourists mostly once we've harvested fish. What do I do with all this? And so, well, helps you with the idea there. So, just a little about sockeye. Unlike all of the other salmon, there's 5 species of Pacific salmon that swim. We don't see a lot of chum salmon in the Kenai. I'm sure the occasional stray one wanders, but other than that, most of the other salmon all eat bait fish in the ocean. So you can get a king salmon or a silver salmon or a pink salmon to bite a lure or a spinner or anything, where they're actually chasing and biting it, because they eat bait fish, forage fish in the ocean. But sockeye are a little different. They are more of like a filter feeder, kind of like a whale. They'll go into large groups of plankton, which are just little shrimp, and they'll feed through those, kind of just open their mouth and feed through. And that's why we believe, we don't know because no one speaks salmon fluently. Try to interview one, you won't get an answer. But we just know that over time we throw all sorts of gear at them. And yes, the occasional one will chase and bite, but it's not a regular thing. And so some genius, and I don't know who it was, a long time ago, figured out that if you just take a hook and a piece of lead and get in front of those fish, if you do it just right, we can figure out how to hook those fish in the mouth and harvest them. And what's special between the Kasilof and the Kenai is we're going to have a couple million salmon swim up that river. And there's a whole lot of fish that we can harvest and still get a high number of fish to return to fill our freezers as Alaskans, and also host all these tourists that come here. And it's one of the few extremely sustainable fisheries that we have right now. We've been having great returns, and so it's a great thing for us and for our freezers and for the local area to have here. So we're super thankful for those guys. We touched on that. So what is flossing? If you guys have kids, you probably know, you may have seen this. This is what the young kids think of flossing. I'm not super good at it. My son makes fun of me, but it's actually not really hard to comprehend if you think about it. But as you're standing on the river, the salmon are coming from the ocean, right? So they're migrating up, and their goal is to go up to one of the lakes or the tributaries of those lakes, and they're going to spawn there. And so as the fish are swimming by you, and they're swimming maybe 2 to 5 wide, sometimes even more in high number days, they're swimming by right at your feet, just a few feet offshore, usually shallower than knee-deep water. And oftentimes in the Kenai or the Kasilof, we can't see them, right? Every once in a while, when that thing gets clear and they push in tight because they're so crowded, you'll get a glimpse at them, which is pretty special. But oftentimes you're kind of fishing blind. And all we're really trying to do is, with our setup, which we'll show you in a second, is to flip our line out, and essentially with our leader, which is the length of line between your lead and your hook, we're trying to get that tangled in their mouth. And essentially when we do that, and as we pull our rod through, eventually that hook comes all the way through and meets the corner of their face, hence the term flossing. So if their mouth's here and that line gets caught, we're hoping to pull that hook right into the corner of their mouth and then fish on, and the rest is history, right? So not super complex to understand what we're trying to do, but it's actually pretty hard when you haven't done it, especially if there's not high numbers of fish going by. It's hard to understand exactly the technique and how to adjust your technique based on all the other variables that are in the river. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So first, I'll kind of review the gear and the setup, because I feel like that's really important. And what you'll see here is probably the most common sockeye rig that you'll see on the river. And we use a fly rod, and we're not like Brad Pitt with our bunion bugs and the river runs through it out there flailing around. The reason that this rod became so popular, the fly rod, I believe, is simply because it works the best. The ergonomics, or if you will, however it's set up, it leaves you less failure. Where when we're standing in the river, we're just flipping our line out there. So we don't want a spinning rod. A spinning rod has too many open, closed components, a handle to get stuck on, and you'll find when you get tangled and the line won't go out, and you have a 10-pound salmon that wants to go far away from you, bad things happen and they explode. So first of all, when we're selecting a rod, typically you can use a bait caster as well. So you've seen the level wind, right? You can use those as well, and one of the perks of that is if you're not used to the reel on fly fishing, it's got a direct drag system, and I'll show you a little more about that. But on a bait casting rod, you can actually hold on to the crank and the line can still go out. The drag mechanism works. If you look here on this rod, when I pull line, you see the handle open and move, or not open, but moves. When a fish is pulling, if you're holding this, the line's not going out anymore. So that's really important. One of the most important things with the fly reel is that when the fish pulls, you have to let go of the crank. We do not want to stop that fish. And one of the natural reactions of people that haven't fought larger fish where we've ever had to use our drag is to just hold on tight, right? We get excited, we're holding on tight, and that fish will darn near pull you over in the water, and it'll break that line, and then they kind of look up and go, whoa, what just happened? So that's what this dial on the side is for. That's our drag. And that is a preset deal. We tell the guys in the boat, don't mess with them. Once we set them, leave them there, and we always say, let go, let your hand go, right? We're just letting those fish pull the line. So this is an 8-weight. This is called the Kenai Red. You can get these at Trustworthy. It's probably the best rod I've ever seen for sockeye in a sense of they break, but they're pretty darn indestructible. Everything breaks eventually, and usually it's the user error from how we hold the rod by holding it too high or slamming in a car door, stepping on it in a boat. But it's pretty rare that a fish is the culprit for breaking our rod. But I think they're usually about $70 at Trustworthy's in town. So that's what I typically use. It's an 8-weight. You don't want to go light on these fish. Any lighter than an 8-weight, and you kind of bring in a knife to a gunfight. You're going to catch hopefully a lot of fish, and you want to make sure that you can land them in a timely fashion by putting enough pressure on them to really to turn them your way. One thing I didn't talk about the reel is a quality reel. And you don't need to go out and spend $300 on a fly reel. If you go down the rabbit hole, you can go to the top of the moon and spend a whole lot of money. This is a Behemoth reel from Redington. And if you look around the guide industry, it's one of the more go-to. It's about $100. You can find them again at Trustworthy or Sportsman's. But they have a strong drag mechanism. And that's something that you use every time you fight a fish. And if you buy the cheaper $40, $50 reels, you'll find that they break down really quick, and then you have no drag that works anymore. And now you're trying to buffer your drag by hand, which eventually ends in a bad way. So a quality reel with a good drag and a larger arbor, a bigger diameter reel helps you pick up a little more line quickly. Other than that, doesn't have to be brand name, doesn't have to be fancy or $300 or have engraved fish on the side or any of that. It's going to get beat up. You're going to move it in and out of the boat and inevitably drop it in the sand, in the water. So you don't want to care too much about it. For the line, personal preference is monofilament. Monofilament likes to stretch, and sometimes we need that stretch. I would never put braided line on a sockeye setup. You need that stretch, and you also want some of the buoyancy that the monofilament line offers. This is 30 pound. Some people use 40, it's kind of a personal preference, but I like to use the neon so that way we can see our angle of line in the water. If you use clear water or clear line, you can't always see where your angle is. And what we need to do, as we're discussing a little bit, is to see where our line hits in order to kind of adjust what we're doing. And then essentially, guys, all we have down here at the end is just a 2-way swivel with just a snap on it and a piece of the lead. And it goes a long ways down to a hook, about 6 to 7 feet typically. And hooks, my favorite is a circle hook. On a circle hook, if you fished halibut, similar version, just a little smaller for sockeye, but it bends all the way around, and so there's no exposed shank. And when we're flossing, one of the nice parts, and there's no perfect hook, but the nice part is that it's harder to snag with these. And we'll talk about snagging later, but snagging's not your friend. It causes big failures and lots of problems, and you can't keep the fish when you do it anyways, legally. So I found over time that circle hooks work great for me, and you have less snagging, and things work out great. So that's kind of your basic setup there. Yeah, moving on. Forgot to hit my button. For leader, which is this part between our hook and our sinker, which is clear, notice, right? Typically I'll use anywhere from 30 to 40. The idea is we're way overpowered with 30 pound. And there's times where you're gonna break it and start all over. That's just part of fishing. But these fish aren't line shy. They're not seeing what you're doing. They're not spooked and running from it. And we can land king salmon on 30 pound pretty easily. So when we go with 30 and 40 or 30 and 30, you're gonna win the battle more often than not. As long as you don't hit the e-brake and hold on tight to that reel, you're gonna see a lot more come to net. I used to have a lighter line and use maybe 20 pound, and I would frequently break fish off, and it gets frustrating. And then you also have fish swimming around with 6 foot of line and a lead sinker, and that can't be fun. Doesn't look fun. So for the weight that we use here, these are just basically an egg sinker with a little loop on them, and you can use any type of weight. You can use a pencil lead, there's barrel sinkers, there's all sorts of things, but why this is what we go to typically is it's a snap swivel, so I can just open this at any time and switch it out, right? And the two most frequent weights, in fact the only two weights that I bring in my tackle box are a 1/2 ounce and a 3/4 ounce. And either or will do depending on the depth of the water and how fast it's going. And essentially, you'll be able to feel as we talk about the technique, how to make that adjustment, which one is right for today. And sometimes we might start with a 1/2 ounce and then feel it after a while and it feels too light, and then you bump it up to a 3/4. And we'll explain that in detail in a little bit. I made a quick release tool. I left mine at home, sitting on the table. But this is a really valuable tool to have. And essentially, you can just get a dowel, a wooden dowel from the hardware store, and any of the like circle eyes that you hang a picture or something, it's just a 3/4 circle. But something that would fashion, you can make one just like this. But the idea, and this is especially nice when you're releasing fish, especially snagged fish, you're going to use this. You want to come help? I need to demonstrate it. I'm going to be this. No, you're not going to do it.
Fish on.
Yeah, we got a guppy. Okay, so the idea is reel it up, reel it up, reel it up, reel it up.
This is embarrassing.
No, you're good. Okay, so when we have a fish on, right? In fact, trade me hands. Hold the hook.
Okay.
Hard. So the idea is when that fish is fighting and we're in there, what we can do is literally hook this around, run it down the line. You can get the hook, go ahead and let go. You can get the hook on there. I don't know what will get you. When it's in the mouth, it's a lot easier, but you can get to the bend of the hook by running it down the line and then just hold this higher and almost dangle the fish and it will pop off. But trying to hand line in fish without one of these and release a fish with pliers doesn't work a lot. Just grabbing the line, there'll be obviously weight on this hook end. You slide it up the line until you hit the fish. Whoa. And it hooks, and then you pull it off. Quick disconnect. Super important tool to have. Makes your life easier. What you find is in snag fish, if you net them, then one, it's hard on the fish, and two, that hook finds its way through the net 15 times, and 5,000 fish swim by you as you're tangled in your net forever. And if you cut it and leave it in your net, then your hand finds it later, and then you have an ER bill. So $5 preventative maintenance makes life a lot better. For the net that you use, obviously you can use anything.
Go around the other way.
But this is kind of my go-to. What if you try to use like a really large net, like a king net, you'll notice the basket's super huge. And one common mistake as we're learning to net these things, you'll see people scooping in the current, trying to scoop from behind the fish, and the fish, they don't go in reverse, right? They only go forward. So wherever that head's pointing is where the fish is going to go next, right? So if we come from the tail and we put it in a 6-knot current, it's going to flag away. We've all been there or seen the guy trying to net your fish from behind and chase it like this, right? Done. We do it too sometimes. It doesn't work. And so why we use just a cheap old net is they get beat up and we have a shallow basket. We don't need a huge, giant 4-foot cave for these things to fall into. And when we're netting, we can hold the net right here so that way it doesn't dangle in the current. And when we're ready to scoop that fish, we can scoop up and under kind of in one big swing instead of holding it in the current and hoping that it randomly reverses its swimming and backpedals into your net. Not always the thing, but we'll talk about netting again in a little bit. Usually, that's what's cool about Sockeye is it takes the whole village. The whole team's working together, whether you're the one fighting one, or whether you're getting out of the way of somebody fighting one, or whether you're the net man or net lady. It's important to know all the positions because you hate it when someone screws up netting yours, and it feels even worse when you screw up netting someone else's. So we'll talk about that. And then stringer, Mr. Brush turned me on to this one. A dog leash is a great stringer. We work hard to catch these fish. And the last thing we want to do is lose a fish or lose a whole stringer of fish. In fact, I was training a young guide last year and he got excited and put a fish on the stringer and forgot to tie it off. And that whole stringer of fish went out to be seal bait as it floated down the river because we didn't tie it off. So they make those kind of plastic coated dog leashes that you can buy them. They're 6 or 8 feet long. They've got a snap on the top, but those work great. A friend of mine turned me on to those. You can use rope. The idea where you kind of hang the fish in the current and then bleed them on that rope. It also helps you count so you don't lose track and end up over your limit because that's not good either. But that's a great idea for stringers as well. Protective eyewear. This is something I see a lot of people not do unless it's sunny and naturally they do it. But we should always be wearing some form of protective eyewear when we are sockeye fishing. When that rod is loaded up with a big fish on it, you have a big hook and a big piece of lead down there. And oftentimes we'll teach you with the technique how to avoid staring directly at that danger. We try to tilt it one way or the other so we're not at the back end of that if it comes loose. But there's all sorts of ER. I'm sure we could go bring the ER doctor into town and he would tell you a few thousand stories. So protective eyewear, super important. In fact, I won't let people fish in my boat without it. And I probably last year alone had 5 times I was hit in the face with a piece of lead or a sinker, and I was lucky it wasn't in the eye, but it's super frequent. So protect yourself. Another good thing if you're boating on your own or just for $10 at the hardware store, a pair of dikes, something that will cut hooks. A lot of times if you do find a hook in your hand, you're going to go to the ER. And a lot of times you can end up popping it through real quick and just crimp it with a pair of dikes, cut it off, and remove that, save the ER bill. Unless it's deep in the meat and not coming out. I've seen it, it's not fun. Multiple times where a pair of dikes can make a big difference. And for $7 or whatever, $10, put one in your boat and you'll be happy. One other thing that I think is super important as well, you'll see in a video later, my kid's wearing one, but we often think of our PFDs, our flotation devices, as what we need in the boat, right? But, when we're standing on shore on the banks of the Kenai especially, that water's cold and it's cooking. And it doesn't take long for it to deepen out enough where we can't stand. And oftentimes, once that bank kind of quits being wadeable, there's a whole lot of shrubbery and tall bank where we can't get out of the water. And it happens, over time. We read in the paper about somebody that fell in the water. So I brought one to show you. These are about $100 for just an average economical one. They're not super crazy. They're just a little life jacket that goes on you. And people may think it's silly. I think it's on kids small right now. But I should have tried it out first. But the idea is it clips around you, and you barely know it's there. Oftentimes people end up almost taking them home with them at the end of the day. It's got a automatic pull cord, so you can inflate it, and it's also got a little sugar pill in here that'll dissolve and pop. But for $100, you'll float, right? It doesn't matter who it is, too. And why men are the most frequent drowners is because 35 to 50-year-old men don't think we need these things. But obviously we do. So for $100, especially for your kids, put one on and have the ability to float. If you fall down and it pops, it's a great picture and everyone kind of gets a good laugh. And you go buy a recharge kit for $30 and laugh it off. But it's not worth messing around with that water to not have one to be safe. Okay, now the nuts and bolts of all this. Hopefully we can make this make sense. Let me pull the hook off here so I don't hurt anybody. We're going to show you a few key pointers, and this is kind of the thing that just comes with time to feel. And after we wrap up too, if you guys are interested, I'm happy to show you a few quick knots, kind of up close. You can't learn anything from that far away. But show you a few things that will help you tie a setup. They're very simple. And that way you can tie a good knot. If you can't tie a knot, tie a lot. The jokes are free, guys. Don't worry. Gonna tape this because it was very fond of catching the carpet. Okay, so a few important things when we are sockeye fishing. Where we hold on this rod is super important. Our arm's gonna be doing a lot of redundant flipping, right? So we wanna make it as easy on our body as we can to complete that motion without blowing our shoulder out, without having to get tired, and it inevitably will. That's why they make breaks and snacks and certain things. But we're gonna hold that rod. If you look right here in the middle, the balance point of this rod is somewhere right up here in the front area, right in there. When you hold it back here, it's super heavy. You're holding the whole weight of that. So we're gonna put our hand, whether we're right or left-handed, right here in the middle, okay? And typically, what we're gonna do next is orient our feet in the correct direction. And this is a really big one we work with a lot of our anglers to understand. If you imagine the current, we couldn't bring a river today here. So if you imagine the current going this way, flowing from across here to this way, we're always going to want to point our feet downriver. And the reason why is if we're facing the river, we have to work hard against our body to go. So if the current's going this way, I'm going to turn my feet pointing directly downriver. And now what you'll see is I have the ability to flip my line out there straight across like so without going across my body. It's a simple motion where I'm going to flip the line straight out. It's almost like a big kind of a whip of a Ferris wheel. Get the lead behind us, we're going to flip it out, straight out, and then similarly, if we're flipping to the other side of the river, and the river's now switched and it's going this way, there's only two sides, thankfully, to think about. It's the same thing. My feet are pointing downriver, and at the flip of the cast is same thing back over the top, okay? And essentially, the next part is, I think, wading depth. Okay, so, yes?
Can you go back to the flipping the line? Just talk about the flipping the line. Do you just casually flip it, or do you kind of gently flip it, or do you hit the water hard and stretch it out?
You want to cast with some emphasis. So it's important, essentially, as you come around with that lead, you want to plop it down pretty hard. You don't want it to fall in a ball. You're not casting it to get air, but and it's just hard to demonstrate without whipping into somebody. But when you get a hold of that lead, oftentimes you're going to, at the back of your cast, let it dangle, so that way you can see what's happening. If you don't look and you get to the helicopter, you're going to hook someone's head very frequently. So as I let my lead dangle like this, and I say, okay, Kevin's not behind me, and it takes two people to not hook somebody. You should always watch your hook, right? And if you're walking behind people, you should be conscious of their hook, because they are maybe not looking at you. And I always say, hey, going behind you, or kind of like Frogger, we'll time as we pass through people in the Sockeye bar, but the last thing you want to do is mistime it and wear it too up as a face piercing. But yeah, as we come through, we slap the water. We come down and slap the water. And essentially there's two angles. If the current's going back this way again, directly at 12 o'clock is sometimes where we'll cast, or sometimes we'll aim just a hair upstream, just a shade up, maybe between 12 and 1 o'clock. But what we're trying to do, guys, is to set a trap. So if I'm over there, and my lead is here where the tape is, right, and my hook is here, we want this line perpendicular to the fish, right, not parallel. The longer this line is perpendicular to that wall of fish swimming by, that's our goal. So that way when one hits that we're setting a trap, a drag net, right? And so what we want to do is if we cast down at an angle, that line's already swung down and we're no longer perpendicular. There's a very limited area where that broadside group of fish can swim into that line. And so angle of your approach is super important. We're going to flip it with force, thank you Greg, straight across, or just a tad upstream.
So are the fish suspended or are they along the bottom?
They can be everywhere. So frequently, and we're getting there, frequently they're very close to the bottom. And so as we get further into this, we'll explain what we're feeling for once we make that cast, right? So we've established our setup, we've established where our feet are going, so our shoulder and our body work, and then eventually, shortly, we'll talk about really what are we feeling for once our line gets in the water, okay? But before we do that, we're going to talk about wading depth. And this is also another very common mistake we have. We have typically, it's the boys usually that are so excited, they'll run way out there to their waist, and they got their brand new waders, and they start going. They're going crazy, and the fish are swimming behind them, right? The fish are bumping into their feet. And the worst thing is when you get a row of people, if they're below you, they're spooking the fish out past you. You're only as good as the anglers below you are in a straight line. We'll talk about that as well. But the idea is, when you look at that current, oftentimes you'll see just far enough to where the rocks disappear. And from about a foot after the rocks disappear, imagine roughly a yardstick or so in that area. That's where those fish are swimming. When they're not being spooked from below you and they're left naturally, they follow their course, they want to hang in that area where it's just out of sight from the sun, but not too far, right? And we'll adjust as we're fishing. If we're feeling, I'm hooking these fish right at the end of my pole, that's your clue to maybe take a step back, right? We can fine tune our distance to them as they hopefully won't change. If we're hooking them right as we cast, maybe that's our clue to step a little closer. And we want to try to put them in the sweet spot, right in the middle of our pull through, okay? So oftentimes when we're wading, if we're knee deep in most spots, some spots are just different, whether it's not universal, but it's pretty consistent throughout. If you're deeper than your knees, you're too deep. And if you're to your ankles, you're probably a touch shallow. And so kind of mid-knee right in here is a great spot to start. And then you can adjust based on also other things. If you see people maybe a touch further catching a fish, it's kind of like, hey, I'll take a step out and find. But you're trying to find where that lane of fish are. We're kind of reading Braille, right? We're flipping out and didn't feel anything. Oh, there, okay. I see. Okay, so that's the idea on wading depth. Amount of line out. This is one that's very important as well. What we like to teach is from our rod tip to our sinker, one rod length of line, maybe a touch more if you can handle it, okay? So if you have the lead in your hand right here, you're going to go from the rod tip all the way to here. That's an awful lot of loose line in the air, right? But the idea is we're going to flip that out straight across or just a short angle upstream, and eventually we're going to pull that line through slowly. And depending on how fast we pull, the faster we pull, the higher in the water column that will be. The lower in the water column, the slower we pull. And so what we're doing and how we adjust how deep our trap is, right, is by adjusting our speed of pull. And so we can do that with two things. We can add more weight. If we feel, our goal when we get out is to feel the bottom. We want to feel the bottom gently. We don't want to dredge. We don't want to feel it hitting every single rock on the way down. we're also not flipping it out and letting it drift, right? We're not letting it drift. We do not want it to achieve an angle of a 45, where you just flip it out, hope for the best, and give it the big slam jerk at the end. It's not what we're doing. We're trying to get it out there, find bottom, and then sweep it through at that nice low rod angle to where we're keeping that line perpendicular as long as we can through that body of fish so that we can find a mouth. And eventually, once that line's in, it's a matter of time until that hook travels through and finds the corner of that fish's mouth. So 1 rod length, typically, or just a foot over, is a great spot to be. If you are really short and you are only to your lead a foot out, you're flipping out, you're not fishing. You're not even near them. You're nowhere near them. You're not even going to hook a butterfly. Not happening. We talked about angle of cast and weight. You know, if you're fishing with a 3/4 ounce and you're constantly getting hung up, you can either decrease your weight or you can sweep through a little faster. And honestly, after all the years of doing it, that's the most important thing that just takes time to grasp, is how fast do I pull, right? And it's all by feeling. You can't teach that. You can kind of coach it a little, but if you're just, I try to barely feel the rocks. When I flip out aggressively, I want to hit bottom as quick as I can with an aggressive plop, and then a nice steady sweep through. And as my rod's coming through, it's low to the water, right off the top of the water. And I'm pulling through and I want to feel the rocks. And if I'm feeling too much rock, I speed up, right? And then you're kind of adjusting every cast until you turn into a robot and you just feel it and you're going. Speed of the pull through. We talked about that, what we're feeling for. We just want to gently brush bottom. If you're feeling nothing, you're going way too fast. If you're feeling nothing and you're going slow, you're in deeper, heavier current, it's time to put that 3/4 ounce weight on and bump the weight up. But the gear can adjust a little bit, but you are usually the main adjustment. And that's your angle of cast and how fast you pull. And that's what's going to get you. Most of these fish are going to be in just above those rocks a little ways. Unless they're really coming through, they're going to be just above the rocks. And you'll actually learn to feel the difference when you start bumping into them. When they're down there, you'll feel the line kind of pull a little, or you'll feel it go, just change a little bit. And that's usually your cue. Just keep on the track, keep the train moving, and eventually you feel that guy tighten up. And this is a big one. Everyone does it differently. I fish around hundreds of guides every year, and some guys are adamant jerkers, and some guys prefer not to jerk. It just depends on the angler. My personal preference, I'm not a big jerker. I try to, if you truly have that fish flossed and that line's going through their mouth, that hook is dangling along their body, right? If you think about it, the fish is here, his body's this way. If your line's here, your hook's in the current, right? Dangling beside. If you jerk too soon or jerk too often, you're more than likely to snag that fish's body, one of those pectoral fins. And if it's flossed already, if you just keep a nice steady pull through often, and you can accelerate at the end, as we'll show you in some videos, which is more of an accelerated pull than just an absolute Kenai jerk slam we've all seen done, you're going to snag less fish. And oftentimes, you're not going to produce more fish with just those crazy erratic jerks. I really don't feel, after 22,607 hours of doing this, that it benefits you to really jerk. For a Sockeye 201, there is a time in certain areas in the middle Kenai with a really high cut bank where it's a pretty quick drop off where that can be beneficial. And really all that does is when you accelerate your speed is it lifts the line up higher. And that's for those areas where the rock structure goes out and drops flat off. And you need to come from the bottom of the trench up to their plane. But that's a different seminar. That's Sockeye 201. That's not today. And you kind of talked already about it, the micro adjustments. To feel bottom, we can either adjust our angle of cast a little upstream, or we can adjust our weight, or we can adjust our pull through. But ultimately, we're just trying to get on their plane, which is just off the bottom more often than not. All right, here's our good buddy Mark Wackler with Alaska Fishology, and he is showing us here some good technique. And it's kind of when we filmed these to put on, we were going to do a different show, but they worked out great for us. But you notice his feet are pointing downriver, right? He's not wading past his knees. And you'll see his rod sweeping through back and forth as he's got just a small upstream cast, and his rod as he sweeps through is low to the water the whole way. Will it let me go back?
I don't know.
Yeah, let's do that again. Let's just watch that one more time. And at the end, you'll see we could classify that as a jerk. I would say it's more of an aggressive pull through. It's not like he's sending a 5-foot slam dunk hook set. More of just an accelerated pull through. And oftentimes, if you've got one floss, that'll finish the job and bring that hook right where we want it. So now we've seen what good technique looks like. Let's talk about too slow. So if you notice on this one, he cast in and he kind of just lets it drift for the top half. It's not really sweeping that rod. It's not continuing to move. Once that lead, if you don't keep pace with it as you sweep, that lead gets out in front of you at a 45 and your line's swung downstream and you're literally not in the fish anymore. They're swimming right by you. So that's what too slow looks like. And this is our common guy, Mr. Wades Too Far out. So right now you can see the rocks have disappeared. He's standing on the fish. The fish are swimming by his feet right now. Right? But he doesn't know. He's happy. He's having fun. But that's one of the big things we want to avoid is if you're not in the right spot, you're not going to catch them. And there's that little sweet spot window where your line's down and you're sweeping. You need to fish in that travel lane, otherwise you're just not going to hook them. Thank you, Mark. Here's a little video of my son. We filmed on one sunny July day. And you can see us hook one here, just a quick little video, but I've had him there, feet pointing down, showing him the way. He's got his life jacket on, wearing our safety glasses, all the good things, and helping him to shore, doing her thing. And then he says, Dad says, hey, watch this. Let me show you how. And we're teaching him the way. Notice I sweep that rod, right? A little pull through, cast back. Upstream, the battery went dead. And sweeping through, one more time. This one's got to work, I'm feeling it. Here we go. Oh, what's that? Yep, we got one. Okay.
You lift your rod when you hook one?
That's coming. So, that's what to do when we've got one. I know. Hold on, Mr. Brush, we'll get you. So, yay, we got one. I know, that's all right. So yeah, so that kind of just gives you an idea, and now we're going to move on to when and where to target. We're going to come back to once we've hooked one in a minute. Obviously, we've got the Kenai and Seal-Off rivers that have the big runs of sockeye. Starting out kind of now in the first of the year, we'll kind of just go through a brief timeline to give you an idea of when and where to go. The first sockeye that come are going up to the Russian River in the Kenai. So they're starting to trickle in now. The reality is about the first week of June, or excuse me, the last week of May, first week of June, they're starting to show up in better numbers. So you can think of kind of June 5th through the 25th as a time to target those Russian fish in the upper there, up above. So that's an idea for there. The Seal-Off in recent years has been getting great runs of fish. They're a little smaller than the Kenai fish, but it's been wonderful fishing down there. Incredible. There's a lot of access for bank anglers as well to go, and it's an easy boat. If you've got a drift boat starting up at Tutstamina Lake, that's a great fishery, lots of access to do that. But those fish typically start showing up in good fishable numbers around June 20th and can last all the way through July. And online, if you Google ADF&G sockeye counts, they show you those as well, so you can kind of get an idea of where are they at, how many fish are where. And in the big Kenai, it takes quite a bit of fish through there to actually have enough to floss. So my first sockeye fishing of the year typically is on the Seal-Off. After we've done king salmon, hatchery kings on the Seal-Off, we switch over about June 20th and target those. And the Kenai, for the second run, the big run of sockeye, really starts ramping up around the 15th of July. You could even maybe call it the 10th, but about 15th of July, it's go time, and it's incredible through the 20th on, through about the 10th of August is gangbusters. And that's that 20-day window where it's really good. So that kind of gives you an idea. About August 10th, it switches. We all pretty much hang up our sockeye gear and the bait will open for coho on August 15th, and we switch gears to start targeting coho. The reds are getting some color on them, and they're really not desirable for the food table anymore. So we kind of let them go, and it's hard to deny wanting to catch bright, shiny coho when they're around and eager. So that's kind of that. When to go, like during the day. Do I go at low tide? Do I go at high tide? Where in the high tide do I go? In the lower Kenai, just like any tide event, as that ocean starts to swell, there's 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day. And you want to get in front of those fish on an incoming tide. So a few hours in between each high tide is about 12 hours, right? So, 6 hours. So you want to, if the high tide's at noon, you want to get in there at 9 a.m., get in front of those fish. And as that tide is halfway through the swell, those fish will start coming through areas like Eagle Rock and down in that area. And basically, if you can imagine a couple miles an hour of travel further. So if it's a morning high tide at 9 a.m. and you can't get off till noon, you might go try up by Centennial, right, or a little higher up for that tidal zone where they just entered the river. But after that, once an abundant number of fish have hit the river, when you're fishing in the middle or anywhere from the moose up, those fish are slowing down, they're hitting slow spots in the river, and it's more of a constant trickle. So you really don't need to time being somewhere in the middle river, because there's fish that are just from days and days of tide stacking that are just more consistently moving, right? And so if you're going down low in the river, it's super important to try to time the tide, because they don't sit around very long down there. They come in from the ocean and they get excited and they boogie and they go, and then eventually they slow down and run into other sockeye traffic, and it starts looking like rush hour in that middle river. But they're both great. It's nice to have a constant trickle of fish in the middle, and when you get in front of 60,000 on a tide in the lower Kenai, you can limit it as quick as you can catch them and put them in the water. I had a day where I did 3 demo casts, and each demo cast I hooked a fish on accident as I was trying to teach the new group, and I was like, okay, never mind, just grab your poles, go get them. So the lower river, try to time the tide, and you'll notice as the tides fluctuate, and this is something I still haven't figured out, and I don't know if all guides have, sometimes they come on the back end. Right, so there'll be a good push on the front of the tide, but once that tide swells, these fish are driven by current, right? They don't see, they have no idea, they don't have a map. And so as that tide floods out on a larger tide, they lose that current as the river swells. And so eventually they kind of mill around, confused, I believe, where are we? And then as soon as the tide turns, that current turns on again, and they get to go. So there's kind of 2 waves. But timing the tides can be important. Also just getting your spot. Sometimes it's hard to find the gravel where there's not other people, so you might be there a touch early just to beat them. We talked about upper, lower, middle. Areas we're looking to target, like specific on the bank, what are we looking for? Ooh, am I getting the hurry up? Okay, yep. Okay, hurry up offense, 2-minute drill. Good. There's a lot to talk about. It's okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, right on. Areas we're looking for, obviously congregated areas where tons of people are popular spots, right? That's somewhere we want to target. You don't want deep water. We're looking to isolate these fish in shallow water with a gravel bar, preferably where they're cutting a corner. We want to, sometimes they'll take the left bank or the right bank, but if we can find a spot where they like to cut the corner, because they're sprinters, they're swimming to that top of that lake to go meet the pretty girls. They want to get there fast. So find a good spot. Most of them are established already. If there's no one there, there's usually a reason. Okay, speed drill on what do we do when we hook a fish. First thing we do when we hook a fish, it seems silly, but we yell fish on. And actually make sure people hear you. Oftentimes, you'll have a big catastrophic failure if you hook one, quiet as a mouse, and say fish on. And it swings down into the next person that would have gladly got out of your way. Let them know, holler at them, hey, fish on, coming down, right? And get their attention. Be flagrant. If they haven't heard you, make them hear you. They'll eventually hear you. Remain calm. Hard to do. We get excited, but remain calm. And remember what I said about holding the reel? Don't hold the reel. Let that fish run, right? We want to survive the first 10 seconds. right? So as we're sweeping through and we hook that fish, we're gonna hook them and keep that rod down low, right? We don't wanna change the angle, we don't wanna do anything yet. That fish is shaking its head going, holy mackerel, I got a hook in my face. I'm not thrilled about this. We don't wanna lift, we don't wanna pull it upstream, we don't wanna do anything but hold that angle and smile and yell, fish on, hey, Frank, moving on down, Frank, right? Now we've got them on for 5 or 6, 10 seconds, right? One of the tricks that we have in the Kenai is what we call the snake charmer. But why, I'm going to go back to rod angle real briefly, why we hold it low is if a lot of times those fish will pop off. We don't want that rod loaded, which is just a bunch of stored energy with a big cannonball and 2 foot of water pointing at our face. So if we're holding it here like this, where's it going to come when it pops off? Right at your face. If you're sweeping low to the ground and that thing pops off, it stays in the water. That lead stays in the water. And we're not flying out at 100 miles an hour, usually hitting someone we love or really enjoy being with, typically behind us, or even worse, a stranger, because it's really awkward. So rod angle is super important. Once we have that fish on for a few seconds, what we're going to do is switch our rod over to the other side and low, which now is upstream. So that fish is directly downstream of us, our rod is low. Same thing, we're not holding it up because we'll kill Frank behind us, right? So our rod's low. Notice rod low is the theme on either side. But then those fish, imagine if I have you hooked in the face with a hook, you're going to come where the pressure is, right? So if they're directly below you and you're down here reeling, that fish is coming straight up the current towards you, okay? And typically we're gonna reel all the way until we hit that sinker. Once we see that sinker, you don't wanna reel it through the eye. That's not, we don't like that. That's how we break rods. So when you get close to that sinker, then our net friend, whoever that may be, is going to be downstream of you, right here, similar to where Michelle is in that area. And that fish is there, and as we get to here, right, where fish is at the sinker, we're going to switch it one more time. We're going to switch it one more time, pull, and then we're going to lift up. And that's your cue, thank you, to scoop underneath. When we aim for the fish, when we're scooping the net, we don't want to scoop for the tail. Right? As that angler lifts, that fish comes up to the top, we scoop underneath the front of that fish, up by their head. They don't go in reverse, remember? And there's a lot of times where we get excited and we lose one right at the net. And that's because we're there, he's coming, and we force it. He'll pull again. Okay, he'll pull 10 feet of line, back to upstream, crank him back in, swing him over, sweep him into that lane of that person below you, straight up we go, scoop away. It's simple, but those few angles really make a big difference. Hook them to the side, fight them there, holler fish on, switch them over, bring them to the sinker, switch them back over, pull, lift, scoop, celebrate, bonk. Awesome. Light to medium pressure, guys. We don't want to horse them. You work so hard to hook them. Don't let them fall off. Happens to the best of us, but remember we've got super strong line on. So we're not worried about them breaking it off too much. That's the snake charmer. We talked about that. It's almost like you play your little clarinet and they go into a trance when you put them upstream. It's amazing. You'll see this, how well they behave, right? They're just sitting there, just cranking. You're like, he's not even mad anymore. And then the minute you turn to the side, he doesn't like it. They're not a fan of it. So that's a good one to land more fish. What to do if a fish is foul hooked? Obviously, we can't keep it. So we want to get it off there. If you've ever been in line where you see tons and tons of people in a row, there's nothing more annoying than a guy fighting a fish that's gone by 12 people and the line's rubbing on your waders and he's still fighting it like he's going to bring it home with him and it's down. So typically we'll either grab the line and give it a big jerk upstream, maybe wrap it around your hand a couple times, have someone help you, and try to pop that fish off, try to break it off. We don't want to pull a fish backwards against the current. It kills them. It's not good for them. Either pop it loose, or at least walk down past the whole row. Sorry, no, these things happen, sorry, and then you get to the end, and then deal with them kind of out of the line so the rest of the group can get back to fishing. You've also got your de-hooker tool, so someone can help you, help a buddy out, grab that line, de-hooker tool, pop that guy off. You don't want your hand anywhere near that hook. If you've got them in a net, and this is why that de-hooker tool is important, putting your hands in there and trying to pull a hook out right next to a live sockeye is a disaster. Even in the net, get your de-hooker tool, but keep your hand away from that 2-aught and you'll be a much happier camper. To net or not to net, this is more so for the gasiloff. On the gravel bars where it's wide gravel, oftentimes it's better, and it's actually really difficult to try to net a fish in 6 inches of water. So oftentimes, if you have the room to do it, when you hook that fish and they're cooperating, just back it up. Back it up, make sure you don't trip going backwards. We've all done it. But you can walk them right up on the shore. And you just want to make sure their head's pointing the direction you want them to go, so they'll pull hard, and then you go. And then they go, and then you go. But we never want to go at the same time, or bad things happen. But as long as their head's pointing your way, you can lift them up. They'll almost surf by the front of their jaw, and you can just pull them right up on the beach, and then get back to fishing is the idea. We talked about netting. Here's just a good spot down at Beaver Creek. Look at their spacing. That's one thing we didn't talk about was, I guess we will here real quick. Why snagging's bad, we prefaced that. Sets a bad example for everybody. If you're showing your kids and you're teaching people how to do it wrong, we end up with more people doing it wrong. It's bad for the fish. They're not protected by the saline and the salt water anymore. If we open up their stomach and open wounds up on them, they rot. They get infected and they die a really miserable, slow death upriver. And you'll see that when you fish the upper river. There's a lot of fish that got hurt along the way. One, it's illegal, and I think we owe the fish some respect for fair chase to find a way to do it right. So snagging's not cool, and it's just not necessary. If you do it right and you have the right technique, you can take great pride in hooking the majority of them in the mouth, and you can actually turn them when you're in control when you're in the mouth. When they're by the tail, you're not turning them most of the time, and it's just not fun to do it right. Catch and release. The gross majority of the people that I know that fish for sockeye, I would say in the high 90 percentile, do not catch and release. Because we're hooking them in areas near the mouth, and there's collateral damage from foul hooking time to time, it's just not a thing we see as a good idea to do. So it's not illegal. The state doesn't have any ruling that you can or can't do it, but it's something that, and maybe you haven't thought about, but we just try not to do. It's more of a meat fish. And also, when the limit's 6, you've hooked plenty. You know, you might have hooked 15 to land 6. And it's probably time for you to vacate that spot, let someone else come in and have an opportunity to access that river as well and go fill their freezer. And there's always tomorrow. So catch and release is really kind of frowned upon. Some quick bank etiquette, how to approach a busy area. It's very intimidating when you show up and there's people everywhere. Like anything, kindness is the way to go. Be nice to people, ask permission, even though you're probably going to do it anyways. You know, hey, do you mind if I join you guys, or are you almost done? Can I take your spot when you're finished, right? Maybe pull over and eat your sandwich and stage near that area. But if you're shy and you never go around the big crowds, you're never going to get into those good spots. So what you find is when people are cool and work together, you can access those spots, and there's a way of doing that where everyone's safe and everyone's having fun, and it's enjoyable to combat fish. When you're around a bunch of knuckleheads that are rude, it's not fun, and your safety is in jeopardy constantly, and people are waiting too far. But when you get a good group of people together, it's actually really fun to see the sockeye dynamic work, and everyone's happy. Parking the boat. If you're in a boat, you don't want to park where people can fish, right? So we want to, either you can pull in, let people off. Certain areas you can park behind where people are fishing. But if not, and you're taking a 20-foot of real estate with your 20-foot boat, oftentimes it's better to park it down below and then walk up to that area so we can leave as much fishable space open as we can. Certain other areas, I mentioned tying off. You have to be careful in certain areas. There's Siri land. There's all sorts of land where your anchor is not allowed to touch that shore. For the erosion and all the stuff with the bank rules, you really have to be careful where you anchor. You cannot, they'll ticket you and fine you, and the last thing you want to do is get in trouble for putting your anchor 3 feet on shore, right? And that's a lot of what we see is people, those signs are there. You're not supposed to step on that bank. You're not going to the bushes to go bathroom. You're not storing your gear up there. You're not sitting up there. Yes, the water's cold. Hop in the boat, but that's why those rules are put forth, because if you look at it at the end of the year, even with those rules in place, it looks like a stampede of cattle went through there. And that's the whole point, is that's habitat for juvenile salmon. How to make sockeye friends. Seems simple, but help net someone else's fish when they're upstream of you. Hey, do you need a net? Once you become friends, this works a lot better. When you see someone coming in with a boat, catch their boat. We're nervous boaters, all of us, still to this day. We don't want to crash. We don't want to beat up our $200 prop. So if you see someone coming, maybe clear the way for a minute, grab that bow of that boat, pull them in, greet them, say hi, ask them what they got in their cooler, they got any jerky, and see what kind of snacks they've got, make a friend, that'll pay off later. And you know, help them dock, help them comfortably dock. Get out of the way at times, be polite, talk to them, make a friend, you know, encourage somebody. Yes, Greg?
With that in mind, with it being such a social fishery, and now that our caves are closed and sockeye are getting more and more popular, do you think it's getting better or worse as far as the number, not the number of people, but how people are getting along and working together? Do you feel like it's gotten better the last few years, or do you think it's getting more contentious?
No, it's definitely getting worse in my opinion. I think etiquette has kind of gone out of the picture, you know, and it's hard. There's a guide versus private angler kind of battle, and it shouldn't be that way. You know, most guides, there's always the rotten apple, just like most private anglers are good people. And I just don't think a lot of them always understand how to interact, you know. But there's the golden rule, back to kindergarten, treat people how you want to be treated, right? And it's the same as if you're the bottom guys, if you're waiting and you're moving everyone's fish, it's not cool to do. And so as guides, we try to police our own people that we're in charge of to make sure they're not ruining anyone else's experience. But that's something, if you're there on your own, you know. And if I saw you waiting out, I'd probably approach you, introduce myself, say hi, and say, hey, not sure if you're aware, but you guys might be out a little far, without screaming at you in front of 50 people and making you feel 2 foot tall and belittling you. You can just say, hey, you might want to scoot back. And some people will laugh at you and tell you to pack sand. And at that point, we often leave because we're not going to catch them with you herding them 10 feet out. But no, it's gotten difficult on the gravel bar. And as a guide fleet, we're down 30% in the last 15 years. We haven't grown as much as people sometimes speculate we have. We've decreased. But other areas of people fishing have come here. Dip netting's brought extra people to the river when they're done dip netting. King closures have taken people out of the boat and put them in a smaller, condensed area. We don't fish Mondays and Tuesdays often, you know, later in the year. So we're trying to figure out a way to make all this work as we're all kind of condensed in the same area, targeting the same fish. And that's what works, is being polite. Share some of your smoked fish. Send them a cold beer. Like, just be a decent human, and that whole weird hackle goes up on the back of your head, neck standing up, on edge, stuff goes away, and everybody is friendly. And if it doesn't work and they get too close, just start whipping that thing around like a helicopter, and you will vacate space. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. How close to stand to other people, that can vary time to time. It seems like common sense, but the most dangerous spot is directly downstream. Wherever that line is going through, it's turning over right there, right? So if you're talking to someone, it's actually safe to stand directly behind them on their shoulder, because that line is whipping around. So usually, I would say about 6 feet is a fair distance. Sometimes we try to crowd tighter so we can get more anglers in, but if you've got the room, you don't want to be catching Billy's boots, right? They're expensive, they leak, it's awkward when you hook somebody, so keep that in mind. One thing I wanted to touch on, and this is what I wish everybody would do better out there, is have better etiquette. Bring a garbage bag. Put a roll of garbage bags in your boat. At the end of the season, it's appalling how many 2, 3, 4-aught hooks and how many wads of line, sinkers, yarn, lead, garbage, beer cans. And it's oftentimes, I have to tell you, it's not often the guides that are doing this, guys. And so, granted there's some, but a lot of people trash the river. You'll see ducks carrying around a fishing line and eagles dragging hooks behind them and certain things. And that's our job. That monofilament doesn't go away at all. So clean up your garbage. If you're going to fillet fish, oftentimes vacate that area. There's a lot of space on the river where you're not in the way of someone else that could be fishing. So grab those fish, high five, head on out of there. Move downriver, find an island, find some sort of gravel bar where you can fillet those fish, throw that in the current where it's moving. That provides food for juvenile fish. We need those carcasses and things back in the river to provide the food that they're supposed to for the juvenile fish. We talked about bank erosion. Same thing with bathroom breaks. When we're sharing a gravel bar and there's maybe 5 or 6 guides, sometimes, if it's a little easier for the boys to grab a tree in certain spots without climbing on the bank. For the women, it's tougher. So oftentimes we will take multiple ladies at once, even if in their different groups, right? But if you're on your own, you can ask anyone else, hey, does anyone need to go to the bathroom? And then one boat will leave, and you won't lose your spot, right? And then everyone that needs to go can go use the bathroom. You can do it in 2 cycles without losing your fishing spot and without stepping on the bank, breaking the rules, and screwing up the erosion and all that. So something to think about bathrooms. Snatching spots or bulldogging. This is one thing that I see a lot at the Harry Gaines gravel bar. It's a public spot where people wade across and they'll go into a pile of guys and just bulldog right into their way, stand in there, or when Frank lands a fish, he's busy and 2 guys will steal his spot. Now this guy's been there all day, worked to get into that spot. It's just rude to do. If anything, and it's that busy, you say, hey, do you mind if I make a few casts while you're dealing with your fish? And most people will accommodate you. But being that guy, nobody wants to be around that guy, and they're just usually the snagger that throws his garbage on the ground too. But respect the people that were there first. You would hope they would do the same to you. So that's my ethics speech. Thanks for enduring that. Just to reiterate real quickly, the biggest mistakes I see, probably the most frequent, are wading too deep, pulling too fast or too slow. Whether we flip it out and we let it drift, or we pull it so fast that we're above the fish the whole time. And that's that adjustment we talked about. Most important for you is finding that sweet spot right in between too fast and too slow. And you'll know you're there when you start hooking them. That's home. And eventually your arm, just like releasing a baseball, right? If you throw it, hold it too long, it hits the ground. If you let go too soon, it goes in the air. There's that sweet spot in between, and that just comes with practice and feeling. The Kenai jerking, you don't need to do it. I'm not a fan of it, and you snag a ton of fish, and it affects you. Trying to land a fish too soon. When you hook a big Kenai second run sockeye, you're not going to land them in 5 seconds. So calm down, breathe, remain calm. Put them upstream, snake charm them right in, and poor netting technique, which again is experience. And just remember, fish don't have reverse; they only go forward. And that's it. Last thing I wanted to share is just a favorite sockeye brine of mine. It's super simple. You can remember it. It's 4-to-1 ratio. It's 4 cups of brown sugar to 1 cup salt. It's a dry brine. Cut your fish in whatever size chunks you want. It's nice because 2 pounds is 4 cups when you get the 2-pound pack. So I'll take a gallon Ziploc, usually with 2 fish, add 1 cup of salt, kosher salt, to that in a gallon Ziploc, shake it up with the 2 pounds of brown sugar, and now you've got a 4-to-1. Layer it in there as thick as you can, give it 24 hours, rinse it lightly, and then smoke it in alder. And it doesn't have a lot of the salty soy, just super simple. A native gal taught me that way back in the day in Togiak, and I haven't deviated much since then. It's very simple. So, yeah, this is the Kasilof. This is a great example of a whole bunch of people accessing the fish. There's definitely a little room you could squeeze in there, but yeah, I hope you guys learned something and had some fun, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And then if you want, I'm more than happy to show you how to tie a few simple knots if you're interested. And yeah, hope you had a good time.
I just want to ask a real quick one. I work at Centennial, there at the visitor center, and people almost every day, I have 5, 6, 10 people ask me when the best time is to fish and stuff. And since they're on the platform, could you tell me again what you said about the tide?
Yeah, so in that area, it really depends on the height of the tide and the time of year, but I think you could consistently there probably say after high tide. If I were going to target Centennial, I would target, from high tide to the next 6 hours in that window. They're going to take a while after the tide, right? So when it peaks is when they're below you. They're coming below you. I would definitely fish after that high tide, even an hour after, and catch the outgoing. You're far enough upriver there where they've got a ways to get to you. Whereas if you were at Beaver Creek or Eagle Rock or somewhere in that area, you might fish more the front end of the tide, right? The few hours before high. And imagine it just like they're shooting a cannon, right? It's like a marathon. There's all those runners down there, and as the tide goes, they start going, And however far they get is based on the current flow and the fish, but the further upriver you get, the more delayed they are. They start slowing down, taking a break, having private conversations with people on the side, doing their thing.
Okay, any other questions?
Just, do you have this in YouTube? Because I think everyone should hear it.
Yeah, we could go there with that. I
You should
mean,
do that.
I wanted to do how to fillet. I thought that would be cool, but we don't have any. They're already filleted, so it's going to be hard.
I was born and raised here, and I'm married to a very avid sport fisherman, and I've learned actually quite a bit.
Awesome. Well, I hope so. You know, it's easy to hear in here, but to apply it, you just kind of got to remember a few of those micro adjustments, and it's really where are our feet placed, how far out am I, and the speed that you pull through, and that will help you. Of course, it's nice to have a coach there to, like anything, whether you got a golf swing you're working on or whatever, to kind of help. Hey, just speed it up a little. And honestly, that's what you pay for when you go with the guide, is just a little fine tuning. In fact, oftentimes when we're on the gravel bar, my voice has no problem carrying out there, especially when people aren't always great at listening. We make sure they hear you, and I've had dozens of times people come up that were like, wow, I overheard you, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I couldn't help but hear you, and I actually started applying some of the things you said, and we caught a bunch of fish, so thank you.
You don't need a microphone.
Stand behind a woman. They catch
Well, and that's the beauty of Sockeye, guys. It's not, you can be 6 years old or 96 years old. If you do a few of those things right, it has nothing to do with strength. It has nothing to do with how long you fished. Women and children are hands down, and Greg's been guiding as long as I've been alive. And I'll tell you, it doesn't matter. Oftentimes, the women and kids smoke the guys because their hand-eye coordination's there. They listen really well, and they do everything you instruct them to do. And oftentimes the overzealous man is out there trying to teach the class that he knows nothing about, flailing to his shoulders. And I'm busy babysitting him, trying to reel him in and focus to get him to listen. And the women and kids are spanking him, where I'm running around netting their fish and I can't even help the overzealous guy because I'm too busy. And then they're worried, hey, just help my kids. And you're like, they're limited out. We're done. We're waiting on you, man. So, yeah, I think that's what's great about it. And it's just this bounty, you know. It's not Alaska without a big sockeye run. It doesn't feel like Alaska until summer, until those things start showing up and you see smokers, you know, going full time and people driving up and down to the boat launch, and you see everywhere you go, young and old, hooking fish, and it's a big part of this river and this community. So it's cool to help people access more of those and catch more of them, and there's plenty around. So. Yeah.
Okay, so we will take announcements from the floor real quick.